بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والحمد لله الذي لا إله إلا هو على ما من به علينا من النعم الكثيرة الظاهرة والباطنة وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله صلوات الله وسلامه عليه أما بعد. By the name of Allah, the most merciful and the most compassionate. All praise belongs to Allah, the one that there's none that has the right to be worshipped except Him, who has bestowed upon us blessings that are numerous, those blessings that are outward and inward. And I bear witness that none has the right to be worshipped other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He's alone, without having any partners. And I bear witness that Muhammad ibn Abdullah, that he is his servant and his messenger. May the peace and salutations of Allah be upon him and his family and his companions, and upon all those who follow upon his guidance into the establishment of the last day. To proceed, إخوان, فنستمر مع فضيلة الشيخ الإمام أبي عبد الله محمد بن حزام البعداني حفظه الله تعالى شرحا على كتاب ابن حجر الأسقلاني بلوغ مرام. So we continue benefiting from the explanation of the noble Imam Shaikh Abu Abdullah Muhammad ibn Hizaam al-Ba'dani, may Allah preserve him, as he's explaining one of the works of Imam Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani that has been entitled Buluug al-Maraam, the achievement or attaining the objectives or the goals regarding the evidences and the proofs of the rulings of Islam.
كثيرا طيبا مباركا فيه وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله.
So the Imam, our Shaykh Abu Abdullah Muhammad ibn Hizaam, he begins. He says, by the name of Allah, the most merciful and the most compassionate. All praise belong to Allah, praise that is pure, blessed, and in abundance. And I bear witness that none has the right to be worshipped other than Allah. He's alone without having any partners. And I bear witness that Muhammad ibn Abdullah, that he is his servant and his messenger. May the peace and salutations of Allah be upon him in abundance, and upon his family and his companions. And there's no might nor strength except by the might of Allah.
قال المؤلف عفى الله عنه قال الحافظ بن حجر رحمه الله تعالى كتاب الطهارة.
So he says, the author, he continues, may Allah pardon him and all of us. He says, Imam Ibn Hajar, he says, translator's note, when the Shaykh says that, he's talking about himself. When he says, عفى الله عنه, may Allah pardon him. As remember, he's reading and he's teaching his own explanation of Buluug Maraam. So he's not going to say, I said, no. He's going to say, mention himself in the third person. And that shows humility. So he says, the author continues, may Allah pardon him. He says, Imam Ibn Hajar, rahimahullah, he says, Kitab al-Tahara, the book of purification.
باب المياه. قال الكتاب لغة مدار مادة كتب على الجمع.
So he says, Imam Ibn Hajar, he says, you students that are following along, write this down. Ibn Hajar, he says, Kitab al-Tahara, the book of purification. Kitab al-Tahara, the book of purification. He says, Babul Miyah, the chapter of the waters, meaning the different types of waters. Babu al-Miyah, the chapter of waters, the different types of waters. So Shaykh al-Ba'dani, he says, as for the word kitab, al-kitab, the word kitab in the Arabic language, it is madaru maddati kataba. It revolves around something that is written. The word kitab is the axis of something that is written down. Al-jam', something that is written and compiled. It is gathered together. This is a book. The word kitab, a book, in the Arabic language is مدار مادة كتب على جمع. So it revolves around something that is written down. على جمع and gathered together.
فسمي كتابا لجمعه الحروف والكلمات والجمل وهو ها هنا بمعنى المكتوب.
He says, so the word kitab, a book, it is called the kitab, a book, because it gathers together letters, wal-kalimat, and words, wal-jumal, and sentences. So here, what is understood by the word kitab is maktub, something that is written down. Something that is written down.
واصطلاحا ما خط على القرطاس لإبلاغ الغير.
He says, as for the technical Islamic definition of the word kitab, he says, ما خط على القرطاس لإبلاغ غيره. He says, it is that which is written down in a book, a scribe or notebook or the likes, لإبلاغ غيره, to inform or convey to someone else. To conform or to inform or to convey لغيره, to someone else. No.
أو ما خط لحفظه عن النسيان.
Or you can also say that which has been written down in order to be preserved so the person won't forget. In order to be preserved so that someone or the person won't forget.
واستعمل العلماء الكتاب فيما يجمع شيئا من الأبواب والفصول.
He says, and the scholars of Al-Islam, they use al-kitab, the word book, and when they compose in their books, they write kitab such and such, the book of such and such, the book of such and such, to based upon what it has from chapters and the categories. So they write the word book, and then they bring different chapters and different fusul, different categories. He says, and we derive this from the words of the Imam al-Bassam, rahimahullah ta'ala. Translator's note. This Imam al-Bassam, he passed away, rahimahullah, was one of the most prominent students of Shaikh al-Sa'di. This Bassam is one of the most prominent students of Imam al-Sa'di, rahimahullah ta'ala. He has a book called Tawdihu al-Ahkam, and his explanation of Buluug Maraam. So our Shaykh al-Ba'dani, he's quoting a Shaykh al-Bassam in his explanation Tawdihu al-Ahkam, in his explanation of Buluug Maraam, called the clarification of the rulings.
والطهارة لغة النزاهة والنظافة من الأقذار والأدناس.
He says, and the word al-tahara, purification, the word tahara, purification, he says, an-nazaha, an-nazaha, wal-nadafa, wal-nadafa, min al-aqdari, wal-adanas. The word purification, you're going to write an-nazaha wal-nadafa min al-aqdari wal-adanas. It is cleanliness or cleansing, and an-nazaha, removing, purifying, and cleansing something, min al-aqdar, from filth, wal-adanas, and those things that are dirty. An-nazaha wal-nadafa min al-aqdari wal-adanas. You're going to write to remove or to cleanse and to purify something from harm and filth, or harm and dirt. This is in the language. This is in the language.
وفي اصطلاح الفقهاء هي رفع الحدث وما في معنى الرفع بالماء أو التراب الطهورين وزوال النجاسة.
طيب, in the technical usage of the scholars of al-fiqh, istilahu al-fuqaha. In the technical usage of the scholars of al-fiqh, how do they use the word tahara? Tahara to the scholars of al-fiqh, it is rafi'ul hadith. It is the removal of the state of being impure. Rafi'ul hadith. The removal of being in the state of impure. أو ما في معنى الرفع, or and what is in the place of the meaning of removing something. With water أو تراب, or dust or dirt. الطاهرين, and the water has to be pure and the dirt has to be pure. So we're going to say the removal or removing of being in the state of impure or impurity, or what is in the place of the meaning of that with pure water and pure dirt. وزوال النجاسة, and to remove something impure, and to remove something impure.
وقولنا وما في معنى الرفع يدخل فيه تجديد الوضوء.
So when we say وما في معنى الرفع, the Shaikh, he says, and what is in the place of the meaning of removing. He says when we say this, we can add here when a person renews his wudu. Someone's in a state of purification already, and then he يجدد الوضوء, he makes a new wudu. He makes a new wudu.
إنه طهارة وليس رفعا للحدث.
He says, so here, the person is already in wudu. He's already in a state of purification. But he makes the tajdid al-wudu. He makes a new wudu. So here he's not removing any impurities. He's not removing himself from being in the state of impure. He's already pure. So this is an example of that meaning here. When we say, وَمَا فِي مَعْنَى الرَّفْعِ, and what is in the meaning of the, and what is in the place of the meaning of raising or removing from the state of impurity. This person is already pure. He's already in wudu. He's already in a state of purification, rather. So it makes a new wudu. So the Shaykh, he says he's already pure. So he's not removing any impurities. He's not removing himself from being in a state of impurity.
وكذلك طهارة المستحاضة وصاحب سلس البول وما أشبه ذلك.
Likewise, the one who is pure, but for example, he may have those excess drops of urine and that which resembles that. Or he says, طهارة المستحاضة, when the person is affected with istihada and they purify themselves after this. So these are examples of that, or what resembles that.
يتعلق بالمستحاضة وصاحب سلس البول يجعلها بعض الفقهاء أحداثا وإنما يعتبر الوضوء عند كل صلاة للاستباحة.
So some of the scholars, they say the one who has istihada and the man who has, or the woman who has excessive drops of urine when they use the hammam, some scholars say this is hadath and they have to make the wudu before each salah. So the Shaykh, he says, but in reality that which is correct is that this is the removal of that which is impure, or being in a state of impurity. So this is also an example of وَفِي مَعْنَى رَفْعِ الْحَدَثِ, is in the meaning of, is in the place of the meaning of removing oneself from being in a state of impurity. Is in the meaning of that. You're not actually removing yourself from the state. You're already in a state of purification. So it falls in the meaning of it. When the author, Ibn Hajar, he says, Babul Miyah, the chapter of waters. In English, translators note, you can't say waters. So in Arabic, you can give the word water a plural. In English, you can't say waters. So here it means the chapter of different types of waters. Different types of water. So our Shaykh al-Ba'dani, he says, the word bab, the word chapter, you're going to write in the Arabic language, al-madkhalu ila shay. It's the entrance into something. The door in the Arabic language means al-madkhalu ila shay. The entrance into something. Something you go through to enter into something. This is the meaning of the word door in the Arabic language. Or here, bab. Here means chapter. But in the language, the word chapter is something that you go into something with or by way of.
واصطلاحا اسم لجملة متناسبة من العلم تحته فصول ومسائل غالبة.
So he says, in the technical Islamic sense, the word al-bab, the word chapter, or you can also say door, is a comprehensive ism al-jumla. It's a noun of a sentence that is suitable with regards to knowledge. Because underneath of it, you're going to have different categories, subcategories, divisions, وَمَسَائِلَ أو وَمَسَائِلُ غَالِبًا. And you're going to mention different issues connected to it. So this is the meaning of the word al-bab. This is the meaning of the word al-bab, chapter or door.
والمياه جمع ماء وهو المائع المعروف ويتركب كيميائيا من غاز الهيدروجين وغاز الأكسجين.
He says, as for the word al-miyahu, the word al-miyahu is the plural of ma'in. The word miyah is the plural of water. Remember, translators note, in English, you can't say waters. That's incorrect grammatically in English. But in Arabic, you can give water a plural. Ma'un, water, miya'un, or miyahun, waters, in Arabic. So the Shaykh, he says, the word al-miyahu, this is the plural of the word al-ma'u. So the singular is al-ma'u. He says, and this says that liquid al-ma'ruf, that is known. Everyone knows water. He says, and it is built upon gases from oxygen and the likes. He says, so this word water doesn't need a definition. It's that liquid that is ma'ruf, that is known. It is made of the H2O from the oxygen and the likes. Doesn't need a definition. He says, as some scholars, they mention that some definitions are going to increase the person in ignorance. He says, so water is water, and dirt is dirt, and air is air. So the definition of it, what you're in need of, is to understand what it is itself. For example, some of you may not have heard the word oxygen. You may not know the word oxygen, oxygen.
قال مسألة أقسام المياه. ذهب الجمهور إلى أن المياه ثلاثة أقسام.
He says the next thing we're going to go over is the categories of water. Our first issue is أقسام المياه, the categories of water. The categories of water. How many types of water are there? He says, firstly, most of the scholars of Islam, al-jamhur, ذهب الجمهور إلى أن أقسام الماء ثلاثة. Most of the scholars of Islam, they take the point of view that there are three types of water. So the first issue I want you to write down is the categories of water. You're going to write, most scholars take the point of view that there are three types of water.
الطهور وهو الطاهر في نفسه.
The first category you're going to write at-tahur. 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 The first category you're going to write is at-tahur. The water, he says, at-tahur, we can understand the pure water that purifies something else. Pure water that purifies. He says, this is al-ma'u al-tahiru fi nafsihi al-mutahiru li ghayrihi. So, faida, benefit from translators benefit. This also shows the importance of studying Arabic. Because in most English books, they say tahur and tahir, and they give it the same translation. Pure water, pure water. But there's a difference between the two. So I wanted to share that benefit, inshallah ta'ala. لعلنا نحث أنفسنا على تعليم اللغة العربية, so we can all encourage each other to study more of the Arabic language. So most books say tahur, pure. Tahir, pure. But that's not the same. They have different meanings. So our Shaikh, he says, at-tahur. We're going to translate it and say, the pure water that purifies. Pure water that purifies. He says, the meaning of tahur here is al-ma'u al-tahiru fi nafsihi. He says, the meaning is pure water, is water that is pure in itself, is pure. Al-mutahiru li ghayrihi. And this pure water also purifies something else. This is at-tahur. This is at-tahur.
المطهر لغيره. فالطهور يطلق على ما جمع الوصفين.
So the word tahur, it is used because of these two descriptions. Tahur. The first description, it is pure in itself. Second description, it purifies something else. If it has these two descriptions, then it's called tahur. If the water has these two descriptions, it is called tahur. He says, once again, in itself, this water is pure. And it can also purify something or someone else. The next type of water we're going to learn is al-tahir. Al-tahir. This tahir, I want you to write pure water. Pure water. Pure water. He says, what is this pure water? This pure water, it is water tahirun fi nafsihi. غير المطهر لغيره. So this tahir is pure water. It's water that is pure in itself, but it cannot purify something else. فانتبهوا هنا. So pay attention there. The second category, نكرره. Let's say it again. The second category, al-tahur, al-tahir. You're going to write pure water. Now the meaning. You're going to say water that is pure in itself. Al-ma'u al-tahiru fi nafsihi. Water that is pure in itself. غير المطهر لغيره. But it cannot purify. It cannot purify. It is pure in itself, but it cannot purify.
وهذا القسم نعم انتقده بعض أهل العلم وقالوا إذا كان ماء طاهرا بنفسه فهو مطهر.
طيب, and there's some scholars who criticize this. Some scholars say if the water is pure in itself, then it has to purify other than itself. So they differ there. There's some scholars, as the Shaikh mentions, they differentiate between tahur and tahir. And then some scholars come from al-fiqh and they say, no, we don't agree. If the water is pure in itself, then it has to be able to purify something else. وهذا قوي. That's strong يا إخوان.
النجس وهو الذي ليس بطاهر في نفسه، أو النجس وهو الذي ليس بطاهر في نفسه ولا يطهر غيره.
And the third category is the water an-najis, the impure water. Don't say filthy. Translator's note. Don't say filthy. You're going to say the water that is impure. Don't say dirty water. No. And don't say filthy water. You're going to write an-najis, water that is impure. It's not dirty. It's impure. There's a difference between this and this. طيب. Let's get back to the words of the Shaykh. So he says, the third category, an-najis, the water that is impure. What does this mean? He says, هو الذي ليس بطاهر في نفسه ولا يطهر غيره. He says the water that is impure, it is the water that is not pure within itself, nor can it purify something else. It is water that is not pure within itself. ولا يطهر غيره. And it cannot purify something else.
قال والتفريق بين الطاهر والطهور ليس بصحيح.
So our Shaykh al-Ba'dani حفظه الله, he says والتفريق بين طهور وطاهر ليس بالصحيح. He says, and differentiating, separating tahor and tahir is not correct. Is not correct. Separating tahir and tahor is not correct.
فإن كل ماء طاهر يعتبر مطهرا.
He says, Hafidhullah Ta'ala, why is this not correct? He says, because any water that is pure within itself, then it is suitable to purify something else. So translators note, he first gave what most of the scholars say. And then he mentions what some scholars argue what most scholars say. And he is from them. Most scholars say there are three types of water. Tahor, tahir, najas. Tahor, pure water that purifies itself. Tahir, pure water that cannot purify. Tahor, pure water in itself that can purify something else. Tahir, pure water in itself that cannot purify something else. And a najas, impure water. That breakdown here is the breakdown of most of the scholars. And then our Shaykh, he mentions, Hafidhahullah, may Allah preserve him, that there are some scholars who argue that. They say, if the water is pure in itself, then it has to be able to purify something else. And that's correct. As our Shaykh, he says, and to differentiate between the tahor, water that is pure in itself, that can purify other than itself, something else, and water that is tahir, pure in itself, that cannot purify something else, he says this is not correct. He says, why is that? He says, because every type of water that is pure within itself, then it has to be suitable to purify something else.
ذكروا بعض المياه قالوا طاهرة ولا تطهر، مثلوا بالماء المستعمل وسيأتي معنا. قالوا الماء الذي قد استعمل في الوضوء أو في الغسل ولا يطهر غيره، وسيأتي معنا أن الماء المستعمل أيضا لا يفقد طهوريته، لا يزال مطهرا على الصحيح.
So then he mentions a small argument. He says we're going to get into it more in detail later. He says those that say, if you ask them, give us an example of water that is pure, that cannot purify itself. They would say water that's already been used for wudu cannot purify, it's still pure water, but someone else can't come and purify themselves by this water. That's some of their arguments. The Shaikh says we're going to explain that later, but this example is not correct either, because water that's been used can purify someone else. So he's just showing an argument amongst the people of knowledge from the scholars of al-fiqh. He says, therefore, if the water is still pure within itself, then this water is correct and suitable to purify someone or something else.
ما دام يسمى ماء بخلاف الطاهر الذي قد ذهب اسمه ما يسمى ماء مثل العصير. يأتي معنا. قال والتفريق بين الطاهر والطهور ليس بصحيح، فإن كل ماء طاهر يعتبر مطهرا.
He says once again, so separating between the water that is tahur, pure water that can purify something else, and tahir, pure water that cannot purify something else, he says this is not correct. This breakdown is not correct.
سيأتي معنا. قالوا الماء الذي قد استعمل في الوضوء أو في الغسل ولا يطهر غيره.
He says once again, if they were asked, give an example of pure water that cannot purify something else or someone else, they would say water that's already been used in the wudu or in the ghusl. If somebody has water that they made wudu with, some scholars say no one else can come and purify themselves from this water. Or someone has made a ghusl, the full body bath, that someone else can't come and use this water he made from the ghusl and now make wudu from that water. He says, we're going to explain this later inshallah. He says, we're going to explain that water that's already been used for wudu or ghusl did not lose its purification and reality and that which is correct. That water that's been used for wudu already is still pure water, and it is correct to purify yourself from that water. So therefore, as long as the water, the strongest position is, as long as the water is still pure water, then this water is correct and suitable for someone else to come and purify themselves by way of this water. He says, as long as the water still keeps the name water. As long as the water you're referring to still has the name water. If it's still called water and it's pure water and you call it water, you can use this water to purify something else. He says, in opposition of the water, that something happened to it and it loses its name. You no longer call it water. It's water in itself, but something happens to such water and it loses the name of water. You no longer call it water. He says, like juice. Like juice. You don't call juice water. The name water is gone. It's no longer water. You give it a different name. If you have water and you add to this water and then it becomes juice, it becomes asiran, it becomes juice. He asked a question to the group. He says, is this water pure or no? Is it pure or not? He says, it is still pure within itself. However, it cannot purify someone else or something else. Why is this? Because the name of the water has gone away. It's no longer called water. something was added to such water, and it غير اسمه, it changed the name of the water. You no longer call this thing here water.
صار اسمه عصيرا.
It becomes, or you will call it now, juice.
ليس بماء.
And it's not considered to be water no longer.
كلامنا هنا على الذي لا يزال يسمى ماء.
So our speech here, what we're talking about now, is that water that is still called water. It is pure within itself, and it keeps its name of water. This is what we're talking about right now.
فليس إلا طهور أو نجس.
He says, so in reality, there are only two categories of water. There are only two categories of water. Tahor and najis. Tahor and najis. The water that is pure within itself, and it purifies something else, or an impure water. Translator's note. Another benefit the Shaikh is establishing here is there's no proof from the Quran and Sunnah that there's a water called tahir. Some scholars, they say there's no authentic hadith in which the Prophet of Allah described water as tahir. And when Allah Ta'ala mentions water in the Quran, He doesn't say tahir. So many scholars, they use as the Quran and the Sunnah as they reference, there's no proof to call water pure water. Water is either tahur or najis. Tahur or najis. Wallahu alam. And Allah knows best.
قال والتفريق بين الطاهر والطهور ليس بصحيح. فإن كل ماء طاهر يعتبر مطهرا لعموم الأدلة.
He says once again, to differentiate and separate between tahor and tahir is not correct. He says water that is considered to be pure in itself is suitable to purify something or someone else based upon the generality of the evidence. As Allah Ta'ala, He says, translator's note comes as it comes in Surah Furqan. Surah Furqan. Where Allah Ta'ala says, وَأَنزَلْنَا مِنَ السَّمَاءِ مَاءً طَهُورًا. And Allah says, and we, meaning Allah, we have sent down from the heavens ma'an tahura, water that is pure in itself and purifies. Water that is pure in itself and purifies. Now he asks a question. He says, so what do we benefit from the word al-tahur? Who can answer? He says, who can answer? One of the students, he says, what we benefit here is the word tahur. The meaning of it is that it is pure water that also purifies. So our Shaikh, he says, the word tahur is a description of water that has two descriptions. The first, the water itself is pure. And the second, it can purify something else. If it has these two descriptions, this water is called tahur. So it's water that in itself is pure and it purifies something or someone else. So this type of water is used in wudu, purification. It is used in the ghusl, the full body bath, and it is also used to remove something impure.
قال كقوله تعالى وأنزلنا من السماء ماء طهورا وقوله صلى الله عليه وسلم الماء طهور لا ينجسه شيء.
Based upon the statement of Allah Ta'ala, as He mentions the verse a second time, وَأَنزَلْنَا مِنَ السَّمَاءِ مَاءً طَهُورًا, Surah Furqan, where Allah says, and we, meaning Allah, have sent down from the heavens water that is pure and can purify. And also the statement of the Messenger alayhi salatu salam, الْمَاءُ طَهُورٌ لَا يُنَجِّزُهُ شَيْءٍ, that water in itself is pure and it purifies and nothing can make water impure. And nothing can make water impure. So he says, so most scholars take the position that the categories of water are three. Because they use that there's water that is pure, but is not suitable to purify something else. And they give an example, water that's already been used. So we're going to explain later, inshallah, when we give the examples, that their example in reality is not correct. So the only categories that remain after that is tahur and najis, water that is pure in itself and can purify, and water that is impure. So every water that is pure in itself is suitable that this water can purify.
قال وعدم التفريق هو الذي قرره شيخ الإسلام ابن تيمية رحمه الله كما في الإنصاف.
He says, and those scholars who have this position that you cannot differentiate between water that is tahir and water that is tahur, that you can't differentiate between water that is pure in itself that cannot purify and water that is pure in itself that can purify, that this breakdown is incorrect. From those scholars that have this position that this breakdown is incorrect is Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah, as he mentioned in his book Al-Insaf.
وكما في مختصر الفتاوى المصرية وهو ترجيح الشيخ عبد الرحمن السعدي.
He says also it comes in his summarized Egyptian verdicts, the summarization of those Islamic questions and answers and verdicts that he gave in Egypt. Also, it's the position of a Shaikh Abdul Rahman As-Sa'di. May Allah have mercy upon him. This is also his position. As he mentions in his book Al-Ikhtiyaratu Al-Jaliyah, those tremendous positions. Also, the Shaykh Muhammad ibn Ibrahim Ali Shaykh rahimahullah ta'ala, in his collection of fatwa, he also mentions that this breakdown is not correct. Also, Shaykh Ibn Abbas rahimahullah ta'ala, in his fatwa, or his book Ghayatul Maraam, that has been collected by Al-Ubaykan, this Shaykh Ibn Abbas also mentioned that this breakdown is not correct. Also, Shaykh Uthaymeen, in his explanation of Al-Mumti', he also mentioned that this breakdown is also not correct. Our second affair, inshallah, perhaps we'll save this one for the next class. He says the second issue we're going to study is al-ma'u al-mudafu ila tahir, is the water that is connected to, or it has something mixed with it that is also pure. So when you have some water and something befalls in such water, and this thing that fell in the water is pure, this is our second issue, inshallah ta'ala. لعلنا نخلي هذا إلى درس ماذا المقدم inshallah ta'ala. So we'll save this for the class that's going to come, inshallah ta'ala. وجزاكم الله خيرا. May Allah increase you all and reward you all with good. وسبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك. والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.